Welcome back to Focus. Today we're speaking about climate change, and I have with me Angela Burnett Penn. Angela, tell us about yourself. Where do you work? What do you do? What's your responsibilities? And let everybody know a little bit more about climate change.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say it's good to be here with you on the Focus Show. My name is Angela Burnett Penn. I am an environmental officer at the Conservation and Fisheries Department within the Ministry of Natural Resources and Labor, under which, of course, the portfolio of climate change falls. And I'm also the climate change coordinator for the territory. So since we started our work on climate change back in about 2007, 2008, I've really been the person sort of coordinating the territory's effort.
Okay, well, I have quite a bit of questions to ask you then. I think you're the right person to ask.
Yes.
So my first question to you today is, what is climate change?
Sure. Well, climate change is essentially what it sounds like. It's a change in our climate, which means that our average weather conditions over a long term, 30 plus years, are changing. So we're seeing changes, for example, in our average temperatures, in our rainfall patterns, in our experiences with severe weather events, in wind patterns, in things like relative humidity, the basic elements of our climate. Those things are changing and changing quite rapidly. So you might ask, why is this change in the current change in climate important? Well, I would say to you that everything that we know today, our cities, our towns, the way that they've developed, our agricultural system, even our very economies, they've all developed in a relatively stable climate over the past few hundred years. And we're now, for the first time, changing that climate and changing it pretty rapidly. And even if we don't think about it day to day, climate really does determine a lot of basic things about the way in which we live. So not only are we changing it, as I said, but we're changing it more rapidly than any other change in the Earth's history than we've seen. So the problem is that the way natural systems could have adapted to changes in the past, the change now is happening so quickly that the fear is that those systems and even our human societies would not be able to adapt fast enough.
So let me ask a question. We contribute to this change.
We definitely do.
But what specifically is causing this change? What is causing the climate change?
Sure. Well, you'd also hear climate change referred to as global warming.
Yeah.
Reason being, the fundamental change in climate that we're seeing is an increase in the average temperature of the Earth's surface. Now, how that is happening, there was a lot of scientific debate on this topic as to, whether this is just some sort of natural cycle that we're seeing or if it's really being caused by humans. And now there is a global scientific consensus that it is predominantly caused by human activity. Now, how are we doing this? What are we doing wrong? Since about, the 1800s or so, when we had the 1780s, when we had the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we discovered the fossil fuels, right? So we have coal, we have gasoline, we have diesel, all of these sources of fuel that allow us to power economies, our lives, turn on the light switch in our house, etc. Now the problem is that every time we burn fossil fuel to create energy, we produce a byproduct called carbon dioxide. We drive by the power station in Parkwood Pond and we see the smoke going up into the air. That contains carbon dioxide. If you drive by a factory anywhere in the world, you'll see the smokestack going up and the emissions there contain carbon dioxide. We have very modern forms of agriculture which give off a lot of another gas called methane. So essentially what we've been doing, we've been increasing the concentration of those gases, primarily carbon dioxide and methane. We've been significantly increasing the concentration of those in our atmosphere. Now, that's problematic because the atmosphere has a very specific composition, and carbon dioxide is only supposed to make up a very tiny, far less than 1% of that composition. Now, since the Industrial Revolution, we've increased that by more than 35%. Mm-hmm. Now, why is that a problem? Because one of the properties of carbon dioxide is that it's a heat-trapping gas. So essentially, we have this blanket around the Earth's surface called the atmosphere, and we're constantly increasing the amount of heat-trapping gases in that blanket. So as the sun's energy comes in, we are trapping more of that energy, more of that heat around our planet. So obviously, then the surface of the Earth, our atmosphere, our air, our oceans are warming up. And that's how we're causing climate change.
Okay, so climate change is real, but what kind of evidence, or is there any evidence that that climate change affects us here?
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence. If we just start at the basic itself, so the temperature record, we've been recording around the globe or temperatures in a very scientific, methodical way for the past 150 or so years, since about 1850. We have very good records, day to day, probably even hourly records of temperature. And if you were to graph that record, it would look something like this. You just see a steady increase in the temperature of the average temperature of the Earth. In fact, the last decade or so is actually the warmest decade on record. So we have that actual recorded evidence, right? In addition to that, since we've been measuring, we also have these ice cores from the polar regions that allow us to go back thousands of years. So what they actually do, they take cores of ice from these huge glaciers and so forth, and they're actually little bubbles of gas trapped in these ice cores. And those bubbles of gas are basically air from thousands of years ago. So you can actually measure and see what the composition of the atmosphere was at that time, and then they can correlate the composition of the atmosphere, how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere at that time, and other of those heat-trapping gases, and correlate it to what the temperature would have been back then. So when you graph it again, you see this increase in temperature as of the time of the Industrial Revolution. So we have that temperature record that we can refer to say, yes, the average temperature of the Earth is warming. In addition to that, we see evidence, physical evidence around us. For example, the glaciers, again, the polar glaciers are melting. We've all seen the images on television. The polar bears are losing their habitat. We thought that the sea ice in the Arctic might not be there. Come the next few years, it might be gone altogether, right? In Antarctica, this was an interesting statistic that I found. There were, since in the last 15 to 20 years, 6 ice shelves the size of the state of Rhode Island have actually broken off the Antarctic Peninsula. So, and I'm sure those numbers have increased since I found that statistic.
Well, yeah.
The Department of Disaster Management is located at number 3 Wayland Road, McNamara. It is home to the government department responsible for the territory's overall disaster management program. Our mission is to reduce the loss of life and property attributable to disasters by ensuring that adequate preparedness and mitigation measures, response and recovery mechanisms are established to counteract the impact of natural and technological hazards. For all your disaster preparedness needs, feel free to contact the DDM at our new number, 468-4200, to speak with one of our knowledgeable staff. That's 468-4200. Or you can visit our website at www.bviddm.com. The Department of Disaster Management, your life-saving connection. To bring you a special edition of Focus. This Focus is brought to you by the Virgin Islands Fire and Rescue Services Department and the Public Information and Education Subcommittee of the National Disaster Management Council. My name is Natasha Letzam, and I will be your host for today's program. Well, as mentioned before, I'm here with 2 fire officers, Mr. Benson Thomas and Mr. Melvin Jeffers, here to talk about our subject today, which is car seat installation, child safety seat installation. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome. Good day, BVI.
Well, to get us started, we have some car safety seats right here, and give us a little bit of information about each of the seats that we have here today.
These are different stages of a safety seat. This is the first one you'll have when you go to the hospital. When you're coming out to the hospital, this is the one you'd use to bring the baby home. And if the baby is a little too small, they'll have an extra rim on the inside that comes with the seat. And as the child grows, you go different stages until you come with a booster seat. This also is a rear facing seat. Some people would want to put it facing so they can see the baby face when they look in the rear view mirror, but it is wrong and it is dangerous, and we don't recommend it. Okay? And upon installing a safety seat, you have to inspect the seat. You have to turn it inside out. You have to take off the padding. You have to check the seat out. If it's not a brand new seat, you have to inspect it. You have to ask a lot of questions. Like, was the seat ever in an accident? How long have you had this seat? How long the previous owner had this seat? Because safety seats do expire. There's an expiration date on all safety seats. So when you're looking, you're going to see some figures. You're going to see serial numbers. And also, what you can do is we would look for a serial number and we'll go to the computer and we'll see if this seat had a recall. Okay? So you're going to watch the seat inside. This is the part that is going to be mounted into the vehicle. This is the base of the seat. Some of them can adjust. They adjust to different heights so that when you put the seat in, the baby isn't leaning forward or back too much. And on the seat, there's a diagram. If you're seeing all blue, that means the seat is properly installed. If you're seeing any bit of orange in either way, that means the seat is not correctly installed and it needs to be boosted a bit. Okay? Also, these are some of the numbers we'll be looking for to see if the seat has a recall and there's going to be an expiration date on the seat also. So we'll know exactly when the seat was manufactured and when it expires. We take off all the padding to make sure that all the foam and the sponge and everything is intact. Because if some seats, if they're in an accident, you could find sharp objects protruding out of the seats. Like piece of the plastic might be broken and protruding. It could stab the baby. It could have pieces of glass in the seat. So the seat has to be properly inspected before we actually install the seat, the actual seat.
And this thorough inspection is carried out here, or is this something that the public needs to know about when they have a used car seat?
Well, they can go through it, but when they come to the fire station, we're going to still go over it and show them what we find and whether or not we recommend the seat be installed. And if we don't recommend it, we won't install it. See, this one is a double adjusting. Some you would find 3, some 2. This is a double. So if when the baby starts off, you would have hair, and depending on the size of the child, you would keep adjusting to suit. Okay? And we call this a 3-lock. These are some of the safer seats out there in the market. See, the baby head, the arms, the legs, and this doesn't be. You don't want this in the chest and you don't want this in the neck. Okay? So a little later on, we'll show you actually how we install the seat and how we test the seat. Okay? Now this one. Get this out of the way.
Okay, for this seat, this is a no-no for all persons using child safety seat. The reason why we say this is a no-no, some may sit with this guard at the top of it and feel it, yes, it's going to protect the baby. Yes, it would protect the baby, but it still would injure the baby at the same time because this is hard plastic. So once the child is in that seat, forward seating, and you hit the brakes, the child chin could come down and hit on this plastic. You mash up the child's mouth and things like that. So we never recommend anyone using a seat like this for their babies.
If you feel this, you see, it's not much support compared to this. So it's not recommended.
But
This
isn't
forward seating.
there a way that we could probably concoct this where we could maybe add more padding that would make it safer? Because personally, I know I had one of these for my kids and I thought it was safe because a seat like this would not allow the child to be free. So if you have your child in a seat like this, you could feel somewhat confident that, he's not outside of your window looking with his head or his body outside of the window because he cannot get out. So when I bought that, I figured, yes, this is a nice seat, because I've seen many times where parents think their child is in the back seat strap up, and all the time the child already freed themselves from the car seat. So if you're telling me this is not safe, is there a way that I can make it safer as opposed to something like this, which easily a child 1 or 2 could be able to get out of?
No, as you state about securing your child with this, I said that it's okay, but the injuries to the child what comes when the vehicle collide and it chins hits on the hard plastic. Now, for a child to be properly secured and know what it's all about, he should be taught at home at all times. Should always let the child know the precautions you are taking and the safety for his life, right? So with this seat, we know for sure there are many children who came and we saw injuries to the mouth or to the teeth, right? So we don't allow anyone with these kind of seats. A matter of fact, if you come with it for us to install it, we're going to tell you plain out, we don't recommend this. If you decide you want it to be installed, you will install it yourself. I'll show you, but you'll install it yourself, right? But we would never install it.
Right now, we have to take a commercial break. When we return, we'll show you just how we install these seats inside of a car. You're watching Focus. We'll be right back. The Department of Disaster Management is located at number 3 Wayland Road, McNamara. It is home to the government department responsible for the territory's overall disaster management program. Our mission is to reduce the loss of life and property attributable to disasters by ensuring that adequate preparedness and mitigation measures, response and recovery mechanisms are established to counteract the impact of natural and technological hazards. For all your disaster preparedness needs, feel free to contact the DDM at our new number, 468-4200, to speak with one of our knowledgeable staff. That's 468-4200. Or you can visit our website at www.bviddm.com. The Department of Disaster Management, your life-saving connection. The Atlantic hurricane season promises to be very active. Knowing the functions of the siren and emergency broadcast systems is a very important part of being prepared. The purpose of the siren system is to alert persons that are outdoors of pending danger. Once the siren is sounded outside of normal testing times, which is every 4th Friday at 2 p.m., the public is advised to tune in to ZBVI, Z-King, ZCCR, or ZROD for emergency information from the National Emergency Operations Center, or NEOC. Knowing what to do in an emergency can be the difference between life and
Today we're speaking about health disaster and health disaster management and how this program area works for us here in the Virgin Islands. Today I have with me Mrs. Dawn Leonard of the Ministry of Health and Social Development. She works closely with the Department of Disaster Management, and she will give us a lot more information on how this is done. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm good.
It's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
I have a list of questions that I want to ask you to make sure that our listening audience get a better understanding or a clearer understanding on health disaster management, what it is all about, how it can be used within the Virgin Islands, and how it can be beneficial to the people of the Virgin Islands. Let me ask you my first question. Tell me about your program area, the health disaster management program area, and you can even go into telling us what your mandate is.
The Health Disaster Management Program is a program within the Ministry of Health and Social Development. The mandate is simple. It seeks to ensure that systems and procedures and resources are in place to provide fast and effective assistance to victims and to facilitate relief efforts and the reestablishment of public health and medical services through, as you mentioned, proper mitigation preparedness planning. So through our program, we have to make sure that there are resources available, there's funding available, and there's also training available to persons who would need to respond. And we also need to make sure the program also seeks to ensure that systems are in place that would help us to rebound quickly from any event that would impact health. But as you know, almost all events impact health. There are some that are very specific to health, like pandemics and other infectious situations that are spreading and causing an epidemic. However, all events have the potential to impact health. All disasters have the potential to impact health. One of the things that we've noted in the Caribbean region is that health infrastructure are very vulnerable to disasters, especially earthquakes that we have within the region. And so if you don't have your health facilities in place, that can put a country in a serious crisis. And so through our partners and doing what we can locally, we try to build capacity in those areas so that we can be better resilient if there's an event.
Okay. So your vision for the program area, what would be your ideal for the program area? I know right now is just you in that area, right? Basically, I know you work closely with the Department of Disaster Management.
Yes.
What would be your vision for that program area?
Well, if I could say it this way, I think the program needs more staff. I think we all know that that has been a challenge. That it's always a challenge to get additional staff. I think what the program does, it does effectively, like through, as you've said, working with the Department of Disaster Management. I don't think we will be as effective if we didn't have that good relationship with the Department of Disaster Management. The program does not function in isolation. It has to rely on other sectors, fire, police, almost all sectors. We work closely with the Environmental Health Division of the Ministry of Health. And so the work gets done, but I believe much more can be done if we had a full slate of staff, if we had a full complement of staff. But things are still getting done. And of course, if I could bring it in now, we always have good technical support from PAHO. So we have a good relationship. The Ministry of Health has a good relationship with the Pan American Health Organization, especially in regards to capacity building. And they've also assisted us in many other areas, for instance, in the review of our plans, because plans are very important to have on hand, so you know what and how you're going to respond, who is responding, what their roles and responsibilities are.
Okay, you mentioned that the police, fire, environmental health, and I would imagine hospital, the health board.
Of course, the hospital services is key to what we do as well, and we work closely with them to help them build their capacity. We have one public hospital in the Virgin Islands, and it's important that we sustain continuous training and we build capacity in the various areas. Next week, if I could say, we're going to have, through technical support from the Pan American Health Organization, we will have a capacity building workshop in mass casualty management. And there's a wide cross-section of the health sector and other sectors that will be invited to that. So we're building our capacity to be able to manage such an event in the event that it happens.
Okay, as a health disaster coordinator, how do you bridge that gap or bridge that link, make that link between DDM or disaster management and the health sector?
Well, it's very easy. Our program is part, our primary goals and objectives are part of the comprehensive disaster management plan that DDM has. DDM is the national agency responsible for disaster management, but obviously you cannot take health out of that because it is a critical part when it comes to managing disasters. And so I don't think that there's a gap that needs to be bridged. There's a relationship that has been established.
Right.
And through the CDM strategy, which the program is a part of, the Health Disaster Management Program is a part of, we feed information into there. And of course, we rely strongly on the expertise from the Department of Disaster Management. I'm sorry.
Okay. I know last year, or was it this year? Haiti was stricken with cholera.
Yes.
And if I can remember clearly, last year there was an issue of pandemic, and the year before,
Before was pandemic.
okay, avian flu. We were preparing for something like that.
Avian flu, and then we actually got
H1N1.
swine flu, H1N1.
Okay. How do you go about preparing for something like that, or how do you prepare the country for a situation like that?
Well, you know, it was very interesting because when I came on board in this position about 4 years ago, that was one of the primary things that I was working on because the world itself was preparing for a pandemic. And I think it would not have been a good idea for us to ignore it. And so the ministry was already in preparation mode for the pandemic. One of the primary things that I had to do in preparing for the pandemic was to develop a plan. And that plan spoke to roles and responsibilities. It spoke to relationships inside and outside of the ministry, the relationship with the health services, the health sector. And that helped guide what we did to respond to a pandemic. And in fact, we did have a pandemic. And we did work very, very closely with the Department of Disaster Management to manage and to mitigate the impact of a pandemic. It was a modern pandemic, one that no one alive in the Virgin Islands would have known about. And so I think we did a good job in responding. I think our efforts to communicate to the public was well executed. One of the things I think we did well was that we went into the community and we did a hand washing campaign. Now the flu, which is influenza, we know the modes in which it's transmitted: coughing, sneezing, etc. And what the research found is that washing your hands often and frequently helps to reduce the transmission of that virus. And so I think it was very effective in the community. We still get good feedback from that effort that we had, that initiative. And fortunately for us, we didn't have any deaths. I can't say that the deaths was as a result of our efforts directly, or the only reason why we didn't have any deaths. But I think we did a good thing. We learned some lessons, and we did adjust the plan to reflect the lessons that we learned from our experience with H1N1. But it was a, if I could say, a good experience because it helped us to see what we're capable of. Now, obviously, H1N1 was not a very severe form of the influenza virus. We all know that. But the country rose to the occasion. All sectors responded. As you know, the EOC was activated at a level 1.
This brings us to the end of another Focus. Remember, Focus is shown or is aired every second and fourth Wednesday on CBN at 9 p.m. and every second and fourth Thursday on JTV at 6 p.m. and every second and fourth Saturday on Channel 52 at 7 p.m. Focus can also be viewed on www.bviddm.com.